Hello to the good people of my econ class. We are in our final lesson before we pay the piper in a couple days, and this lesson is called Comparative Advantage, something that applies to countries, businesses, and you. And hopefully you get the lesson. So if you missed class, this is what we did. I checked if you understood these terms. These are the bricks we're going to build the house with if you get that. Advantage, absolute, goods, services, balance of trades, balance of payments, specialization, deficit, surplus. So I checked to see if we knew those. Check yourself if you don't. And then I asked a question kind of just to prime the brain. If you can produce everything you need, why would you trade? And we talked about that for a little bit. Then I reinforced these terms again, really tried to drill it home. And these are the four things I hope you walk away with at the end. How do a nation's limited resources affect its decision to engage in international trade? Why do specialization and trade lead to increased efficiencies, production, consumption, satisfaction? That's revisiting yesterday's class. How does the use of comparative advantage increase gains from trade for two or more nations? And in what ways have you personally benefited from gains from trade? And then I pose another question. Why do countries trade? And by now you can probably guess. When in doubt in this class, save money. You'll probably be all right. It's not a wrong answer, but it's a little deeper than just money. Some places can't produce something, just the climate or the soil. You need to get it from somewhere else. And people like variety. Variety is the spice of life. I don't want to eat the same things all the time. I don't want to wear the same things all the time. So people want variety. It makes life better. And even if they can produce a product, if another country specializes in that item, buying it from them may actually have a better product and be cheaper. And a lot of people are like, wait, why? Something close should be cheaper. But think about it. Something close, it may be really difficult to produce it. There might be a place far away where it's really easy and it's high quality and it's actually cheaper to do that. Strangely, last apple juice I bought, I noticed there was apples from South America. I'm like, I live in Michigan. I mean, there's apples everywhere. Washington State, there's apples everywhere. Still, they probably specialize it in well and, did it up cheap, and the apple juice is perfectly fine. So you get that. They wish to conserve limited resources, and other countries have an advantage. So that's why countries trade. And there are two types of advantage. Okay, there's absolute advantage and comparative advantage. And once again, advantage is just you're in a better position. That's all it is. I'm in a better position than you. That's an advantage. Now, absolute advantage. Now, this concept is that if two countries or businesses have the same amount of resources, one country can produce more than the other using fewer resources. And there's a lot of variables in that, but for the simple part of this, let's say country A, they can produce 1 million gallons of milk. Country X can produce a 500,000 gallons. Country A has absolute advantage. So you see, it's not a crazy difficult concept. Hopefully you get that. And going a little deeper, we'll take it on a smaller level than a country. We'll take a bakery. Okay, so bakery A can produce 150 dozen cookies. Bakery B can produce 500 dozen cookies. Who has the absolute advantage in that? Okay, so, and then I asked you to think of your own example of absolute advantage, and we shared them out. So obviously, if you're watching this because you missed class, just think about that. Now, here's the thing: absolute advantage isn't everything. So, some people might say Bakery A should just shut it down. I mean, they only make 150. Bakery B makes 500. But I want you to think about this. Let's say Bakery A produces 150 with three people, and it takes 12 people to produce 500. Who's actually making more money? Or a very specific, they call it a niche, Niche, where you are producing a really specialized thing. You see these in these ethnic markets. If you drive around, there's Italian markets and there's Arabic markets, and there's certain niche products that people want. And just because you have absolute advantage, it's not everything. You get this. Now, then there's comparative advantage. Now, this is the concept that one country or business can produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than the other. Okay, so country A can produce 1 million gallons of milk at 125 per gallon. Country X can get the 500,000 at $1. So again, you have to look at both sides of it to see, what's a better deal. And I'll go back to the bakery example. Comparative advantage can also go with something small. So let's say bakery A can produce 150 dozen cookies a month for blank per dozen, and bakery B 500 for this. Now, the reason why I left that blank, if you tweak the numbers, That's going to determine who's got the advantage. Okay, so think of this like math class. I probably should have put an X in here, an algebraic variable. So it's not just raw production that makes you a successful business. You got to look at the overall sort of thing. Now, here's the question. How can you distinguish between comparative and absolute advantage? Probably not a word you use every day. Distinguish is just you look at something as different. So if you see that word on the SAT or the ACT, it shouldn't scare you away. Distinguish, you're like, hey, what's different about this? So if a country can produce everything it needs, why would it trade? Even a country like the United States has an absolute advantage with Panama on both milk and cookies. It might be cheaper to produce cookies in Panama, which gives them a comparative advantage, but in this case, it's more efficient for the U.S. to specialize producing milk and Panama to specialize producing cookies. When we specialize in trade, products become cheaper for consumers. So if you wonder why this whole controversial thing about tariffs is so controversial, do you get how, whether you're for or against them, do you see how it changes this equation? Okay. Not to get overly political and whatnot. Okay, anyway. So the US can only make more televisions than China. The US can make more television than China. Why don't we make our own? Well, here's why. This is another example I showed in class. U.S. Department of Labor, our minimum wage is 7.25 at the time I'm making this video. In China, individual provinces set the wage. There's no federal or national minimum wage. One of the highest paying provinces minimum wage is 1,300 yuan, which is about 129 per hour. Okay, so obviously 129 an hour versus 725. So if it takes 6 hours of labor to build a TV, it would cost 43.50 in labor cost and 774 in China. And because labor is so much cheaper, it makes sense that they would specialize in manufacturing products that require a great deal of low-skilled labor, while the US specializes in goods that require a great deal of human and physical capital. So this, you can take this example, you know, time and time again throughout the world. So in countries, trade is important to keep a balance of goods exported and imported. So the term balance of trade refers to the value of all goods and services exported minus the value of all goods and services imported. Think of it like plus and minus. Stuff comes in, stuff comes out. Money comes in, money comes out. If a country's exports exceeds its imports, the country has a trade surplus. Okay, if it imports more than exports, it has a trade deficit. So, surplus good, deficit not so good. And balance of payments is how countries keep track of all the monetary transactions in each sector of the international market. It is the difference between the money a country pays out and versus the money that comes in. Okay, this applies to a country, a business, even your credit card. I mean, if your paycheck's bigger than the stuff you pay for, you have a surplus. You got some extra cash. You got some savings. If you run up your credit card bill and you're running up your interest, you got a deficit. So it applies at different scales. Okay, so to wrap up, I made sure once again, kind of beating you over the head. Are you good with these terms? And then we went over these four things one more time, and that was the gist of the question. And then I gave these tangible questions that will be your future test questions. I'm just going to be real honest with you. And you go through it. And by the way, do the best you can. Okay. And then there's one more question. Oops. Okay. Oh, so at the end of that, I put the answer key. So if you missed it, you can see if you got it right. Okay, I know that was kind of a long PowerPoint. I cut to the chase pretty fast. But again, go through that. No comparative advantage versus absolute advantage. Make sure you got those questions right and those terms, and you should be all well and good. So after this, we're going to review for a day and then take the first exam afterwards. All right. So hope everybody's doing okay, and hoping we have some success on the test. Feeling optimistic. I hope so. Okay. Take care.